Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, I record this show every day for a handful of reasons, really. One is that I am cursed in this life with a curious mind, because I love technology and I love listening to human stories and learning more about what drives people, and I'm compelled to learn more about the moment where people fell in love with technology and embarked on a journey where they leveraged technology to transform people's lives, workplaces, industries, or indeed the entire world. And today's guest ticks all of these boxes and much more. His name is Reasen from Springbuk, and that's spelt Springbuk, where he helps drive the goal of preventing disease with data. And he believes that a company's mission and adherence to the mission through bad times plays a significant factor in whether it will succeed. And I think I should also highlight that in year one, Rod flew a fighter plane, drove a NASCAR 172 miles an hour, bungee jumped off Victoria Falls Bridge, and not only that, he's also been to Africa 5 times and has visited 27 countries in total, and spent time with people from some of the poorest countries in the developing world to some of the richest people in the world. And I wanted to learn how that contrast and love of technology gave him a breadth of perspective with what's wrong in the world, and also explore the art of the possible and how we can change things. So I think we've got the perfect balance between technology and a human story here. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to Indiana in the US so we can speak with him right now. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Well, thanks, Neil, for having me on. I love the podcast. I love your goals, what you're trying to do with exposing really cool tech and how it's transforming people's lives. I'm one of those, and my story kind of goes back to I grew up in a blue-collar family. My dad was a factory worker for 32 years until the day they came in on a Friday and said, pack up your goods, wouldn't even let them go to their locker. And came home that day. I just graduated from college, and as a young college kid, to watch your dad in tears because he just lost his job, and that really set me on this track of, hey, how can technology really be better? How can we use it to affect lives? And that was just a little tiny seed that didn't bear itself for many, many years, but I'm a father of 4. My oldest is 20 years old in college. My next is getting ready to go to college here this next coming fall. And then I have 2 young boys, so 2 girls, 2 boys, married for 23 years this June. And I live in Indianapolis, Indiana.
Fantastic. And one of the things that I love doing on this podcast is, yes, it is a daily tech podcast, but I also try and find out a little bit more about the human story behind those tech careers and journeys in technology. And a quick look at your backstory here. I mean, you've started 7 companies, sold 4 of them, and 2 are still ongoing. You have been described as a trailblazer, innovator, and visionary who sees trends at the macro level and tries to inspire others to see what you see. But I've got to ask, where did your love of tech come from, and what was it that put you on this path? Because you did mention a few moments ago about how that seed was planted. Is that where it all traces back to?
Well, it would be well before that. Although my parents were both in blue-collar work, my mom was very entrepreneurial. She started selling Avon products and eventually grew into be one of the district managers, starting out handing a book and going literally door to door, asking people to buy makeup and jewelry. And my dad was a car guy, which I still hold to this day. I'm a very big car guy. And I learned that from my mom has a picture of me with my dad when I had to have been maybe 3 years old, sitting on top of a 65 Mustang inside of a junkyard. And I grew up in one of those families where my dad had a good job, blue collar, but they were always trying to make our lives for my brother and I better. I won't say that was necessarily technology, but that was definitely part of the entrepreneurial journey of create freedom, do what you love to do, and that nudging by your parents.
And I also read, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I read when I did a bit of research on you that in 1 year you flew a fighter plane, drove a NASCAR 172 miles an hour, bungee jumped off Victoria Bridge. And then you also, during your traveling there, that you saw the poorest of developing countries and hung out with some of the richest people in the world. And it was that contrast that gave you the breadth of perspective with what's wrong in the world and also what's possible and how we can change that. So can I ask that you expand on some of the lessons that you learned on your journey there?
Wow, there's a lot to cover in that question, but maybe I'll start with something that was just relevant for today. We had a leadership training, and we were talking about fears. And I have always feared heights, and but I'm also one of these types of people that say, hey, if it's a fear, it's, psychologists would say that we're only born with the fear of loud noises and falling as children. And most other fears we end up learning as adults. And so I have this concept, whether right or wrong, that most of your fears are created in your mind and they're not really real. And so fear of heights is one that's created in my mind, but it's not real. So I chose to go jump off of Victoria Falls Bridge in Zambia, Africa. And I'm crazy because that was terrifying. And I have video to prove how terrifying it was because I screamed all the way down. And then had the opportunity through a friend of mine that had won a fly a fighter pilot plane. It was a prop plane over near Cincinnati. He won it at a golf outing and he didn't want to do it. And he offered it to me and it was in the same year. And I'm like, okay, this is a test to see if I really want to beat this fear of heights. And so I got in the fighter plane and got to go do some dog fights in the air above Cincinnati, Ohio, which was just extremely fun. And then in the same year, another friend of mine had won a Richard Petty driving experience as part of driving a NASCAR. I just happened to be gifted with quite a few gifts from friends that couldn't use these amazing things. And so down at the Walt Disney World racetrack, was able to drive the M&M's car and topped out at 172 miles an hour, which was, for a car guy, that was like, I wish I could have gone 200. That was amazing.
Man, that's just phenomenal. And I'm curious because the bungee jump off Victoria Falls Bridge is something that I've always wanted to do. And it's not necessarily the falling that would stop me. I think it's more the taking that leap off. That's the thing that I might struggle to do. So how did you navigate around that?
Oh, it's one of those things that you say, yeah, sure, I would love to do that, tough guy. Yeah. And then the time comes and you're standing there and your wife looks at you and says, hey, we're here today. Why wait till tomorrow? Let's do it today. And I looked at her like, I can't let down my bride who is now challenging me to go do this jump. And so they strap you in, they put this towel around your ankles and then put this strap around you. And standing there, you see the Zambezi River flowing, coming right off of the Victoria Falls Bridge, and it is a bit daunting. Yeah. So you stand there, they kind of nudge you to the edge of this platform, and they say, okay, on 3. And when they started counting, I jumped on 1. So I'm doing it. And it's neat. I'll share a little more, maybe about the whole broad experience of Africa and just what it does for your perspective of life, living in coming from an underdeveloped country and living in America and all the blessings that we have here. But that experience was really, really cool, though.
Yeah, and I'd love to dig deeper on that because, like I said, you've hung out with some of the richest people in the world and also some of the poorest people. And how did that contrast affect you and change your perspective, and equally want you to go out there and create a solution or make the world a better place? Can you expand on that and the lessons you learned?
So when my wife and I went to Africa in 2012, actually 2011, when I had sold my brokerage firm and we wanted to take some time just away as a family. And we had some missionary friends of ours that were in Zambia. And he said, "Hey, come on over. Would love for you to see our work. They have an orphanage and a small college, training up young folks to just have some form of education, and of course this orphanage." So we went over, and that was part of the Victoria Falls jump, and went up into the heart of Zambia, near the DR Congo border in a city called Kitwe, Kitwe. And it's a mining town. But part of the day that he took us out, he showed us his work that he was doing. And he said, "Hey, I want to show you one last thing." And so got my wife and I, his wife, and then my two daughters at the time, they were 8 and 10. And he pulls out into the country, and country is not like what we would think of in the United States. This was just this dirt road and a small grouping of trees, and he pulls into this cemetery. And it's hard to describe without Googling African cemetery to get a glimpse. This is not a well-groomed cemetery. It looks like a red field with, think of Georgia type clay, and these mounds of dirt with wood stakes on top, and sometimes, very rarely, an actual headstone. And as we went around the graveyard, you just look and you're seeing the ages and the birthdays to the death age. And it started to really grip us. I'm like, "Hey, Phil, the ages, is this normal? Is this an area for just the kids?" And he said, "No, the average lifespan for a male in Zambia is 27 years old." And you hear about it being an American, third world countries, lifespan's less, but to see it in person and to see the graveyards and to see in the distance people holding their own funerals, he said there are dozens of these funerals every single day. It's just, the death rate is so high. And it grips you. Even now, as I tell you, I've got goosebumps because it grips you to realize that at the time I was over in my 30s and I was past the age of prime for a man had I grown up in Africa. So just the blessing of being born in the United States, even into a blue collar family, was far greater than having been born in Africa. It's a gripping moment in life.
I could really imagine. It's incredible. I think we've perfectly set the scene for Springbuk here. So can you tell me more about that and the problems that you set out to solve with technology and also the company's mission there?
Yeah, so part of that personal journey for me was I considered actually going onto the mission field and staying there, helping this man out with just the work that he was doing. And ended up taking a trip into South Sudan with him, spent 30 days on the continent, and did some exploration to say, is this what's right for me in this next journey? And ultimately, I came back through a lot of wise counsel and prayer and just decided that wasn't the right thing for me at the time, and started to explore what I knew from my business career, what I knew from what I had just experienced in my life. And I had always been this you would think of me, if you knew me personally, I'm always on the cutting edge of adopting new technology. If it's new, I want to try it out. But I'd always been part of the consumption side of that technology, never building it and being inside that inner working. And so started to really think through what experience that I had combined with where I felt like I could make a difference, both in the world plus with technology. And started to narrow down on this point of view around healthcare specifically. And this is where I stepped out of kind of what I had known. And I'd started a brokerage firm. I have never had a W-2 from a company I didn't start. So I'm not one of these career corporate guys that just have never had that corporate life. I've always kind of done my own thing and tried to figure out big problems and said, hey, the world's your oyster, go figure out how to solve it. So I said, let's pull back healthcare, as if there's not something more complex. so let's pull back healthcare and really figure out what are the drivers in the United States. Why is it not, through these years, why have people not been able to figure out how to solve it? Why do the employers continue to have this rising cost? And is there really a solution? So that was the question that I started to ask myself as I came back to the States. And the point of view that we landed on was that in the United States and really throughout the world, there's really two delivering mechanisms. There's buyers of healthcare and there are deliverers of healthcare. And when you break those two apart, the buyer side of healthcare would represent employers in the United States and then also the government. And worldwide, that would be fairly representative of the buyers in healthcare. The deliverers are the traditional entities like the physicians and hospitals, and now we have digital health solutions, telemedicine. Some of that market's morphing quite a bit, but they're still on the delivery side of healthcare. And then so you go down a lane and you say, okay, if that's true, that point of view is real, then what are the main drivers for each of those buckets? And ultimately, the buyer cares about getting the best value, and you'd even say cost, then engagement. They want to make sure that they're getting the best care for their patients. On the delivery side, it's all about engagement. And the word cost or value rarely actually gets discussed a ton because they're on the receiving side of the dollar. And so the more care they provide, the more dollars they achieve. So the light bulb kind of goes on pretty quick when you say, wow, we have perverse incentives here when the buyer and the seller have different goals in mind. So how could we fix that solution or that problem? And we narrowed down and said that, well, what if we approached it as preventing disease with data, which ultimately became our mission at Springbuk? How do we build a technology that could allow for both the buyer and the deliverer to meet on the same side of the fence instead of being against each other and work to accomplish a very similar goal, knowing that engagement does cost money, but we can do it in a very efficient way and deliver care all the way through the ecosystem of healthcare in an efficient fashion. So that was the genesis of the idea. And I'm sure we'll have more questions here about, what it is that we do, but that was the idea.
Yeah, because I believe you also turned to technology to then improve employee health outcomes while also saving employers money at the same time. So what was it that made you turn to technology to do that as well? I feel there's got to be another story there almost.
Well, so there's four questions I think are important for when you think about starting a company or building a product. What is the problem? The four questions are, what is the problem? Who has the problem? Do they know they have the problem? And then number four, are they willing to pay to solve the problem? Number four creates a business. The top three can create really interesting features and product. So ultimately, the organization that has the problem of rising cost of healthcare is the buyer. The buyer pays for it. And so if you follow the idea of Freakonomics, you've got to be able to solve it somehow. So the closer we got to asking those four questions, and more we realized that there are these moments in time where the employer in the U.S. makes a decision about what they build in their healthcare plan, their insurance company that they may offer, any digital engagement solutions that they may engage with, the plan design. All of that happens in a very pretty small window of time called open enrollment. And in that moment in time, once that decision is made, everything else cascades from it. So we said, what if we could help shed a brighter light with data on that decision-making process? Because if an employer chooses, for instance, a digital health solution around a certain disease state that doesn't necessarily solve for the problem that they have in their population, they won't know they made a wrong decision until likely 12 to 18 months later. That means that every human being that's associated with that business, either an employee, a spouse, a child, someone that's on their health plan, could be completely neglected from that problem that they have because of a single decision. we felt like that was something we could solve. We felt like it was a big problem.
And if we look under the hood of everything that makes this possible, I believe you guys are utilizing artificial intelligence and machine learning, etc. So a question that I've got to ask on behalf of all the techies is how does it all work?
So every time you and I as consumers go to the doctor, we wear a wearable, we put off a ton of pieces of information about us. And every piece of information, if it continues to sit in silos, is only worth what one siloed organization can see and use for that piece of information. But it's not good in totality. When you bring all that information together, think about this in any decision that you and I make as human beings. The more information we have, the better or more clear we are in making the right decision. Certainly more comfortable we are that we've made the right decision. The same way works with technology and healthcare and the decision-making process at that moment in time. The more information you have at the individual member level that can roll up in aggregate, the better the decision that you can make about the investment that you make as an organization, anyone on the buyer side, to how you engage or what vendors you engage with. On the delivery side of healthcare, it's almost baffling, and we probably don't have time for me to tell a personal story. If we do, I'll circle back to a personal story about my oldest daughter. But it's astonishing that if you go in for your annual physical, if you get 15 minutes with your doctor, that's like, wow, I got a full 15 minutes. Most people get less than that with a nurse practitioner or a nurse to come in and do most of the work. And the doctor says, how you doing? Good. And you leave with a prescription in hand or maybe a referral to someone else. And the doctor is limited to the information that they have in their hand. Healthcare is so screwed up that it's adding technology and the efficiency to what we see in the commercial world. When we think about how we are engaged as consumers with product, that technology is available now. And that's what we saw 6 years ago was what if we could bring all of the paradigms that are happening to us as consumers around how we engage with video, with products we purchase on the internet, and bring that into healthcare. And that's what we're doing. I mean, it's not just a single piece of technology. It is literally bringing the paradigm of technology to healthcare.
And just to bring to life everything that we're talking about here, do you have any examples of how you're helping businesses and just help listeners understand how it could even transform their workplace too?
I'll give one example that just came up in a conversation a few weeks ago about an employee at a customer of ours who ended up having the business offered a mobile mammography. A woman decided to go in and have a mammography done because the employer offered it for free. And she found that she was in late-stage breast cancer, had late-stage breast cancer. They caught it early enough and were able to perform surgery and save the woman's life. That employer was engaged because they saw information that we gathered in our system to say that there was an opportunity to have a gap. They had a gap in their offering around mammographies, and they had a large portion of the population that did not show that they had that annual screening done. And so the employer said, hey, that's something I care about my people. And so I'm going to make that investment. And because of that investment, they saved someone's life. That's pretty awesome. And that's only one drop in the bucket of the lives, the thousands and thousands of people's lives that are saved because of the information that we can drive all the way through the system.
Wow, what an incredibly powerful story there. And I always say at the end of every episode that technology works best when it brings people together. And I love what you're doing here. And I'm curious, as someone right in the heart of this space, what tech trends are you seeing with things like the health data and biometric screening and holistic wellness programs? Are there any big tech trends that have caught your attention?
Certainly the buzzwords are machine learning and AI. And the deeper you get into those words, and folks that are in the space, they'll tell you that this has been happening for years. It just wasn't real popular or the buzzwords weren't there. I think the biggest trend that I would see is that the sentiment around the use of data as consumers has changed. I'm 46. When I first got into this business, the sentiment of Big Brother owning my data was, I can't trust Big Brother. And that's still not wrong. There should always be checks and balances around making sure that the usage of the data is to help the individual. And that's the industry that we're in. We're not in an industry of give me more data so I can sell you more stuff. And I think that's the tainted side of data that consumers often get wary about. But when it comes to your health, if I could tell Neil or Rod about changes in a lifestyle or changes based off of information you had on me, I'd say our world has changed in the way that we think about that level of invasiveness of data in a positive way. We see the benefits of having that data, whereas in years past, we probably would have been a little bit scared of it.
And in today's podcast, we have spoke a lot about your past and a lot of your exciting adventures, but you strike me as the kind of guy that's not just going to leave it there. So I've got to ask, what excites you about the future, and how are you going to continue to leverage emerging technologies to solve real problems?
So this one's easy for me. We set out 6 years ago to prevent disease with data. And I can still remember having people stand up in their chair, or not in their chair, but stand up out of their chair when we were presenting this or pitching this idea. And whether they be a physician or a technologist, they'd say, well, who are you? You're not a clinician. You're not doing any doctor work. So why do you think you can actually prevent disease with data? And I said, because the data will be there. We have all of these paradigmatic shifts in technology where we have massive amounts of data. Our computation power is more powerful every single second. And we have all of this ability to use it in a way that we've never had in the past. So there will come a day where we can start to prevent disease. And when we said that 6 years ago, we got laughed at. Now we're at the point where we can tell the stories of people's lives that are being saved because of our technology. That's only going to become more and more real as the data becomes more available, as more interoperability starts to happen, as not just our consumer space, but those players in the healthcare world realize that we're here to help each other. Healthcare is not a space that shouldn't be just about, perverse incentives of doing more stuff to get paid. It really should be about the human being and how we extend life, how we make life better, how we have the best care. That world is now, it's not just the future.
I love that. And I love chatting with you today. Now, before I let you go, though, I'm going to throw a curveball at you. There's something I'm trying to do at the moment, which is create a Spotify playlist of music that has inspired guests on their tech journeys and adventures in life. So my question to you is there any particular song that has stayed with you or inspired you on your journey?
My favorite song it's absolutely my number one Spotify song is a song by Newsboys called Miracles. Second to that, though, when I'm concentrating, I put on soundtracks of movies, and my most favorite one that I've been listening to is the Wonder Woman 1984 soundtrack. So that may throw your listeners for a loop there, but
absolutely love that, and I will put a selection of those on the playlist. But more than anything, thank you for joining me today. But before I do let you go, can you remind everyone listening of where they can find you online, and also contact your team if they've got any questions?
So our website company is Springbuk, springbuk.com. On the web is obviously the best place, and of course LinkedIn if you want to find me personally.
Excellent. Well, I'll add all those links to the blog post that will accompany this episode. You really have lived a full life and had so many adventures, and I've got to get you back on in a couple of years or before then, because I've got a feeling there's going to be many more tales to tell. But more than anything, just a big thank you for sharing your journey in technology as well, and spending time with some of the richest people in the world and some of the poorest, and then turning to technology to find out a solution and change the world for the better. It really is inspiring stuff. But But more than anything, just thanks for joining me today, Rod.
Well, thank you, Neil, for what you do, and keep getting the word out. There are some really, really cool tech that's coming. It's exciting time to be in the space.
Now, we will have people listening all over the world. I see on the podcast stats each month, I think it's something like 165, 166 countries. And the reason I record this show is to try and light a spark in someone listening anywhere and on any device, and inspire them to go on their journey and explore the art of the possible and bring their vision to life with technology. And I think if we all learn from each other instead of doom scrolling down our smartphones, maybe we can all inspire each other to do great things. And you can blame me being brought up on cheesy 80s TV shows for that one. But a big, genuine thank you to Rod for taking the time to come on here and talking about how any organisation, big or small, can create a healthy workspace. But I'd love to hear your stories, your dreams, how you're using technology to make the world a better place. And equally, if you've got any questions, please let me know. And remember, after recently chatting to Matt Manners from the Inspire Club podcast, I've shamelessly lifted one of his ideas, and he asked guests to share that one song that inspires them in their life. And that could be going on stage, heading into the office, exercising, or just relaxing. We all have that one song, don't we, in that soundtrack of our lives. But I'm going to throw this up open to everybody listening as well, because this podcast is not about me or even the guest. It's about you all listening too. So I'm going to create that podcast. So I'm going to create that playlist on Spotify. Just look for Tech Talks Daily. You'll find it there. Let me know what song you'd like me to add to that list, and I'll do that for you too. So I'm interested in what kind of tunes you come back at me with, but please send that over, techblogwriter@outlook.com. Our website is techblogwriter.co.uk. You'll find links to all the social channels on there and much more. But that's it for today's episode. So a big thank you for listening. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.